So I'd like to share a reading with you this morning, and it is a poem by Stacy Zeiger, and it is entitled, My Family. My mom is like a fire. She's always warm, but sometimes she gets too hot. My brother's like a tornado. He always moves fast and spreads destruction wherever he goes. My sister is like a snowstorm. She's pretty to look at and icy at times, but with a little sunshine, the iciness melts. Together, we are like a partly cloudy day. We have our moments of darkness and gloom, but the sun always peeks through. My very first day as your minister was a Tuesday in August of 2023. And as it turns out then, and still now, Tuesday, late afternoon, early evening is the time for faith formation team meetings. I was vigorously encouraged to attend. And when I say vigorously, I do mean vigorously. I did not dare to say no, which I didn't want to say anyway. Faith formation, religious education, the cultivation of curiosity is the heartblood of Unitarian Universalism. From the very beginning of our religious history, with the Unitarians in New England and the Universalists also in New England, but throughout the East Coast, with both of the denominations that would eventually come together, the formation of our faith, the ongoing examination of who we are and why we are, has always been a passionate commitment. And it has been a passionate commitment of mine as well. Our Universalist ancestors started, actually, the Philadelphia Convention of Universalists in the year 1790 voted to unanimously start a Sunday school in every congregation. And for many of those congregations, it wasn't even just for the children in their congregation, it was for the children in all the neighborhood that surrounded the churches, because our Universalist ancestors understood that learning how to read and write was a pathway to liberation. And so they made that commitment. Our Unitarian ancestors did something very similar. In 1810, they pioneered what was a new term, Sunday school. William Ellery Channing, a name many of you may be familiar with, who was actually the inventor of Unitarianism. Being Unitarian had been an insult up until that point, and he took the term and said, "This is who we are." He believed, and he always was an activist for saying that our congregations should encourage rational thought, and most of all, curiosity. Very apt for this month's theme, no? We have, as a people, always been passionate learners and seekers of truth. Always curious, always open to changes in our world and developments that we could adjust to, that we could attempt to understand and share with each other. And we know, at least those of us who, like me, have come to a certain age, we know that as we grow and change as individuals, our needs change, our questions changed, and perhaps even the knowledge and wisdom or love that we have to share grows as we grow older too. Some of you have heard me say more than once that if it had not been for faith formation, I would never have become a Unitarian Universalist minister. when we started taking our children to our local Unitarian Universalist church in Wilmington, Delaware, they were welcomed and embraced. This was close to 30 years ago, in a way my children had never been welcomed and embraced before. I was used to seeing the stern-looking adult coming towards me, and I would brace myself because the message that followed would usually be something like, your child, one in particular was often the cause of such visits, doesn't do this, doesn't do that, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. Your child should be doing this, should be doing that. So the first time that happened in this church, when a man who had been a volunteer for many, many, many years started coming up to me, I thought, oh, here it comes, and I braced myself. And he got this huge smile on his face, and he said, "Your child is amazing." I almost fainted. I don't faint, so I didn't, but in hindsight, I probably should have. He said, "Your child is so creative. Your child has such interesting ways of looking at things." And there was a kindness and an acceptance in his voice that I had never heard. And I can't tell you how badly I needed to hear it. And it was my faith community that gave us that. And I didn't decide in that moment to become a minister, but that opened my heart to the possibility. So when I tell you that this thing that we do as congregations to nurture and welcome our families and our children is perhaps the most important thing we do, I know that's true. I know that's true. That child I just talked about, who is now in his early 30s, loves his UU church. He's on the nominating committee. He's a worship associate. He teaches middle school religious education and was telling me a couple of weeks ago about a student in his class. They were, I don't know why, but they were talking about the miracles of Jesus of Nazareth, and my son Luke asked, "So how do you all think Jesus did the miracle of the loaves and the fishes?" And one of his students said, "Oh, he went to Costco." I say, yes. And who will ever forget the wisdom of one of our very own congregation members who was asked on Easter Sunday, "Why do we eat eggs for Easter?" And the wise and learned answer was, "To honor the chicken." You can't, first of all, make that stuff up, but also how incredibly precious that is. So I said a moment ago, my children went through this incredible formation almost 30 years ago, but even at that time, the cracks were beginning to show. This glorious history of Sunday school, which had served so many generations, was starting to become unsustainable. Society has changed in those intervening years. The capacity, there are many more obligations and things that can be scheduled on Sunday mornings, not the least of which is sleep, or family time, or sports, or different kinds of things that families can and want to do together. The notion of could be as many as 12, anywhere from 12 to 20 people getting up in the middle of a worship service to go out to teach our children was already 30 years ago starting to become onerous. And when then they were wonderful. We had curriculum galore that required our children and youth to come every Sunday, and that just simply was just hard to do. Times changed. In 2009, one of the, actually I believe a visionary in our movement, whose name is not well known, the Reverend Christina Willa McKnight, shared and produced a really, really sobering but really powerful study. And what she learned in this study, which was meticulous, what she learned was that of all the major denominations, or I guess mainstream denominations of in the United States at that time, Unitarian Universalism ranked at the very bottom in one area, and that was how many of our young people remain Unitarian Universalists or eventually come back to our congregations. And what she learned was that at that time, it hasn't been done again since, as far as I know, only 12% of our young people came back or stayed. Barely enough to keep the whole ship moving. Compared to other denominations, 44% for Presbyterians, 50% for Episcopalians, 67% for Evangelical Lutherans. The highest retention rate was for Mormons. I don't have right in front of me the statistics for Catholicism, but that also was very high. And I know I'm probably going to sound very crude when I say this, but our beloved Unitarian Universalism cannot survive with this kind of trajectory. Not when such a large number, such a large proportion of our young people leave. In 2009, 2010, when the Reverend McKnight wrote her study, our growth rate as a denomination was 0.78% per year. In 2025, our denominational statistics show that our faith formation programs lost 2% over the year before. And I say all of this not to be a Debbie Downer, but to point out that if you, as I do, value what happens in our congregations, what families and young people and adults enjoy, have available here, then we need to think long and hard about how to support it. In the year 2017, a very courageous New England religious educator by the name of Kimberly Sweeney, a name that I imagine many of you are familiar with, Kimberly Sweeney wrote a devastating article called The Death of Sunday School. And many of the things she talked about are the things I have mentioned this morning. In the introduction to it, I reread it in this last week, and in the introduction, she says how difficult it was for her to write these things because she, like all of our amazing religious educators, love this faith and love what they do. She said it was so hard for her to share what so many of her colleagues already knew, that this older system was no longer working. And this is what she said: "It is past time to return to our roots by engaging, inviting, and expecting our families to worship together. It is past time to return to the ministry of preparing parents and caregivers to be the primary religious educators for their children. It is past time to bury Sunday school, a model that has not been adapted to contemporary times. The future of faith formation resides in family ministry." You and I know. We know it in our bones, we know it in our minds, we know it in our hearts. We know that our faith cannot be only shaped by doctrines that were set in stone thousands of years ago. Those are really important and beautiful and worthy, but our faith needs to be, like our hymnal says, a living tradition. We need faith that honors and incorporates our past and also envisions our future. When I came here that first Tuesday, I met that group of incredible volunteers, many of whom are still involved. And I was able not only to engage in conversation and become a kind of a regular in those first weeks on a Tuesday night, and I heard and was able to be part of one of the most wonderful conversations. What do we envision for this community? And that conversation continued and expanded throughout the congregation, and there were meetings. Now, maybe I'm imagining this, but there were meetings. I think that there were posted things on the walls of the coffee room with ideas from all of you who were here at that time. This is what we want. We want to engage. We want to minister to families. It was incredible to watch. And by the time budget time rolled around, and there was a lot of stuff to do that year. There was a lot happening here. When budget time rolled around, you voted to fund a position for a director of faith formation, even though at the time there was a very small number of children. In the words of our great wisdom elder Kevin Costner, you said, "When we build it, they will come." I got that reference right? That movie, right? And it was true. You funded the position when some of you had said, "We'll never get somebody good to come here." Susan Jennings, hello. She's hiding over there. That's right, Amy. That's right. Susan came here, and I won't embarrass her too much further, but Susan came here with so much experience, not necessarily in this area, but a desire to make a fantastic program come together with this fantastic congregation and these groups, these dedicated volunteers. And what you have seen, what has happened, right? Now, with the help of an amazing colleague, Bethany Jamalvo. This congregation has become, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm really not. What has happened here has become a beacon of hope and inspiration for other congregations, because our world needs this. The fact that on just about every Sunday in this congregation, there is a second-hour program for everybody, for adults, because we don't park our brains at the door when we turn 20. For children, for youth, everything from, I remember the first Sunday, Minute to Win It. I was sitting in my office and there was all this laughter and I was like, what? Okay. It is extraordinary. And our faith formation professionals go to other meetings and learn that congregations, you know, like ours was struggling, right? Congregations are struggling to the point where we're actually presenting a program at General Assembly, hopefully to help people understand how this can happen. Now, I imagine that many of the objections that I've heard in past congregations, you know, we don't want children in the sanctuary. They make noise. I said, well, guess what? Adults make noise too. We do not. I shouldn't mock anybody. The idea that our youth, our children, feel part of this. This is their church too. This is your church. Whether you cry or make noise or whether you do the things that we do, this is your church. And I will never, as long as I live, forget the day that little Alice stood on that pew right there and looked right at me and did, okay then. Okay. Yes to this. Yes to the dancing. Yes to honoring the chicken. Yes to Costco. Yes to welcoming. And instead of, and I say this because I've had this conversation so many times, it can be an inconvenience. I get it, not to hear well if there's any kind of noise happening. But what a privilege. Ha ha ha, yay! Hi, Alice, I was talking about you. What a privilege it is to nurture all of our families together. I may never be a grandmother, although I'm working on it, and if they don't call me today, there will be words, but private interactions with my children. Jen Blosser, whose name I haven't mentioned, was my beloved friend and colleague in Maryland at my last church, and who helped with her talent and her enthusiasm our folks here to reimagine what religious education could be. Jen Blosser taught me that every child needs 5 to 7 adults in their lives who are not their parents, to love them and see them and help them grow. I can't think of a better place than a church like this one. It is a joy to me to watch this congregation grow in this way. And I will carry with me so many beautiful memories of things that have happened, of pictures that have been made, of little cards that I have received. My pockets are full of little notes about this is what we believe. We believe that love is important in our church. And yes, honoring the chicken. Amen, dear ones. Ashe, and blessed be.